So again, we went over these last time, and notice they do mention all of these other ones. And I'm not going to, notice the definitions it gives is not exactly the same as mine. Here it says, let you access any database that supports OLEDB, let you access any database that supports ODBC and non-databases. All right. Virtually all three of these could be used. So with our SQL Server, we could use it as an OLEDB or as an ODBC, but it doesn't really make any sense to do that. All right. I was going through an example. I was looking at a video this guy had created online that he had done something similar to what we're going to be doing, but he did it with Microsoft Access. All right. And Access is not SQL Server. So they were using OLEDB with everything they did, even though it's another Microsoft product. All right. But I do want to make sure, because we kind of went over this quickly last time. This stuff I really think, or at least I'm hoping, how to add, update, and delete data, that stuff at least made some sense to you. All right. And it's not identical to what we did using PHPMyAdmin and MySQL, but it's really similar. Again, syntactically, it may be a little bit different. All right. But the important part are the last few pages of the chapter. All right. And where am I here? So starting on 546. Now, I don't want to read to you, but you should have an idea. They talk about here what a data provider is. It's not that you have to memorize this stuff, but it should at least make some sense to you. All right. This is interesting. It says, although the current .NET framework also includes an Oracle provider, it has been deprecated and will be dropped in a future release of the .NET framework. And the reason that that's important is because Oracle is probably the #1 used relational database management system, DBMS. All right. And Oracle also owns MySQL. All right. When you start using this stuff, no pun intended, but this using statement here will be at the top of your program. Since we're using the SQL things, when we start to do different things, if you don't put that in, you're going to get an error message. You've seen this before, that it'll bring up the light bulb, and if you click on it, it'll ask if you want to add that using statement. So you can manually put it in yourselves, or you can wait and have the system put it in for you. It doesn't really matter. But again, key sentence here. The .NET data providers provide the ADO.NET classes responsible for working directly with a database. That's it. More than anything else I can say. So here they show how these basic components work. All right. The data table is just that. That's the table. All right. And what we are going to be doing, and I don't know how close, how much we'll get done today or won't get done today. All right. That's not what's really important here. But what we're going to do, in fact, what I'm going to ask you to do a little later today, if you remember, in our customers table, all right, when you think about it, we've got about 8 fields. I don't remember what it is, but it's like customer first name. Just imagine I wrote customer for each one of these. Last name, street address, city, state, zip, area code, and phone number. I think that's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Everybody with me? So what I'm going to ask that you do for tomorrow morning is I want you to build a form with all this stuff in there. Now that said, you're going to put in here, if you want, you can put a heading in. I don't care if you put it in or not, but something like, customers. But in here, I want you to do this. I want you to say just name. Or if you want, it's up to you. You can say first name / last name. But the way I want you to implement this is I want there to be 2 text boxes there. All right? Then you can say something like street address and one longer thing like this. Then something like city, state, zip, and you'll have the city, a comma, the state, and the zip. All right, so that takes care of this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. And then we'll just call this phone number, period. And you'll have 2, one for the area code and one for the phone number. Then I want you to put in 4 buttons down here. This one will say first. This one will say previous. This one will say, wrong, next. And this one will say last. So what we want to be able to do is to ferret through the entire database. But we don't want to put this stuff in. We want to build the interface, but when we run it, we want it to be pre-populated. So in other words, our first customers should be our first customer's first name, last name, street address, city, state, zip, area code, phone number. Make sense? Then each time you click next, it should go to the next record. If you click last, it should go to the last record. If you click first, it'll go to the first record. Now, if you're at the first record and you click previous, nothing will happen. Unless you want it to loop around. You see what I'm saying? You could do that if you wanted to. And when you're on last and you click next, nothing will happen. All right. Sometimes people do that they literally loop it around like that. You can if you want to. All right. Now, there's other stuff we could do here. For instance, we could come in and do a count. We could have another text box or something here that would show how many records there are. Okay. I'm asking you this question. Looking at this picture, there is a field missing. Can somebody tell me what it is? What? No, the area code's in there. It is in there. That's the area code, that's phone number. How about this one? How about that one? Could we include that? Yes. Does the customer, does anybody ever really probably have any reason to use that? And the answer is no. Now, sometimes it gets included anyway. When we actually start to build this, every one of these things that you see that's a box will be of type text. If you were to decide to include the ID, so let's just say, you don't have to do this, but let's say up here we put in customer ID. All right, and you put it right here. If you were to do that, don't make that a text box. Make that a label. Why? Make it a label, not a text box. Why? What is a label?
You can't change it.
It's read-only. Once you set a customer's ID, you really shouldn't reset it. That's how that customer is known to your database. I don't particularly think there's a reason that we have to include this. But what we are going to eventually be able to do is to go in and modify any one of these records, add another record, or delete an existing record. Right now, it's the R in CRUD. It's the read. It's like you're doing a select statement, which is exactly what we're going to do. So the command we're going to do to bring this up is going to be select star from customers. So that right there is going to end up becoming our command object. Does that make sense to people? All right. We have to physically connect our database. And I did want to show you something because otherwise I'm sure I'm going to forget. So I just wanted to show you this. I'm going back to where we were yesterday. And none of my stuff was showing here. Remember this? So I went back and closed everything. And when I closed it, I hit refresh again. And lo and behold, when I did, under tables, there were all my tables. Not only that, if you right mouse click on any table, let me just grab products here, and you choose design, notice what you get. For lack of better words, kind of a schema description. All right. Now, if I erase this, did I leave it up there long enough that everybody understands what they're supposed to be building? Yes? I mean, I saw it looked like Nick there took a picture, which is fine. I can take a picture too, or you can take a picture with your phone if you want to. All right? But I'm just expecting that you're going to be able to build this. There's nothing hard in here. This is it's a heck of a lot easier than what we've done in the past. All right? I do want to mention too, after we do this, after we get this done, up and running, we're going to create another project. And we're going to have the whole thing built for us without having us to put in one line of code. And we don't even have to build the interface. We don't have to do anything. And I'm going to show you how to do that using the wizards. Now, a lot of times when you see this built, instead of first, it will look like this. Instead of previous, it will look like this. Instead of next, it will be this. And instead of last, it will be this. All right? That's no big thing. I just thought since we're just starting, I want to make sure everybody knew exactly what was going on here, that we would do it that way. All right? All right, so I'm going to erase this. So this is explaining what all of these different components are. Good, bad, or indifferent, it does it over just a couple pages. And that article that I sent you this morning does it over 20 pages. And when it does it, it also gives you more detailed explanations than what you have here. It's not my goal to sit and read to you, but you should be able to take a look at this now and start to have a fundamental understanding about what's going on here. That's what I'm looking for. All right? So read that when you get some time. Notice again, the data provider remains connected to the database only long enough to retrieve or update specified data. Then it disconnects from the database and the application works on the data. This is referred to as that disconnected architecture. We started seeing that in that article. And I'm going to go back to the article in just a minute. This is concurrency. We talked about that. Again, you don't have a concurrency problem because we're all using our own copy of the database. If we were all using the same copy and sharing it, we could potentially run into a concurrency problem. All right? This talks about, as you can see, how the data set is organized. Guess what? You actually know this stuff. We looked at tables. So this data set, which is basically the database, it's made up of tables. Tables are made up of columns and rows. Each column is a field, each row is a record. We have typically at least a primary key constraint. All right, you can have other constraints. Now, just so you know, back in the olden days, like in the 90s, before people actually came in and said we should have an ID field here and it shouldn't mean anything. A lot of times you'd have a field like we have here at Rankin, you'd have both a social security number and a Rankin ID number. And either one of those could potentially either one of those could be a primary key. They shouldn't be. I mentioned before that a primary key should be unintelligible. In other words, if somebody finds it out, it shouldn't make sense. But technically, either your rank and ID or your social security number. Either one of those could technically be your primary key. When you've got two different fields that you could both use as a primary key, they're called candidate keys. And you typically choose one of them. Now, with the other one, you typically put what's called a unique constraint on it, which means it still must be the unique, but it's not the primary key. The reason I'm telling you that is if I had was running a Rankin database, I would have a field called something like student ID, and it wouldn't be your Rankin number, it would just be a number. And then I would have, that would be my primary key. Then I would have your Rankin ID, and I would have your social security number, and both of those would end up having unique constraints on them. Not only that, just so you're aware of this, it is also possible that you can run through, and when you are putting data into a database, you can run fields through encryption tools. So that instead of showing, 111-22-3333 for somebody's social security number, you get this long string that's been encrypted. All right? Because if you don't do that and people can look at it, then that's referred to as plain text. Sometimes it's called ciphertext. The bad thing about that is, wow, if anybody can look at that information, all right, that could be worrisome. That could be problematic. I know my daughter has had some problems with a bank that she deals with. And her stupid father, that would be me, when she went to college 10 years ago, put my name on her account, just in case anything emergency would ever happen, and I never removed it. So she was having problems, and she said she made a payment to someplace. They said she didn't. Guess whose credit started getting dinged? That'd be mine. My credit was almost perfect, and it went down to 600 something. Not because of anything I did. Reason I'm telling you that is not because I'm bragging, complaining, or anything else, but when we finally got it rectified, and they had to validate me, what did they ask me for? You want to guess? Nope. The last 4 digits of my social. Now, I don't know if that's all they saw, all right, or not. Okay, then they asked for my name, then they asked for my address, etc. So, the other thing that's in here are relations. That's how tables are related to one another. So again, you can read this stuff on your own, and we will take some time and go over that document that's in there. All right, we will take some time to go over it. And I've said this before, it's not the kind of thing that you're going to be able to read and go, it totally makes sense, I've got it memorized. No, you don't memorize something like this. But hopefully you see how the pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, fit together and how they're all used. So here they talk about, again, the data adapter. All right, and they're showing it in here. Now, in this example, they're showing a data reader, and notice they have select. A data reader, remember, that's that read-only thing. That only makes sense with a select statement. It would not make sense to use a data reader with an insert or an update or a delete. Okay? The good news about using this data reader like this is you can give somebody read-only capability. I don't want anybody in the world to be able to look at my personal information and be able to potentially change my personal information. All right? Now they talk in here, they say 2 ways to create a different object. And we're going to run through both of them. In this chapter, they kind of start having you do it in code, but not really. I want you to look on the screen, please. You see this thing right here? This is what we're going to be doing in the second example. This is going to be created for us. All right? And it'll have here the ID, the first name, the last name, the address, the city, the state, the zip code, the area code, and the phone number. They'll all be here. Plus, when you look up here, it has a count. It'll tell you what records you're on, and how many records there are. Notice there are those arrows that I mentioned before. I said the double arrow. Sometimes you see it instead like this with a single arrow with a slash after it or before it. But this is, again, first record, previous record, next record, last record. The plus sign, if you click it, allows you to add a new record. The X allows you to remove the currently selected record. And the disk there allows you to save changes. Does that make sense? All right. And you'll notice when you look down at the bottom, or hopefully you notice down at the bottom of the screen, what do we have? Well, look, there's a data set object. There's what's called an adapter manager, a binding source, a binding navigator, and a table navigator. So there's a bunch of these things that we're working with. Now, if you decide to do it the way that we're going to do it the first way, and it's the harder way, we're doing it the harder way first. All right? Because I want you to see what each of these pieces are and how they fit together into the mainstream of things. Then when we go back and do it the other way, well, geez, I want to do it that way all the time. No, because the project that we're going to start on, I don't know if we'll start on it this week or next week, we're going to do it the hard way. Because that will give you the opportunity to show a prospective employer, yeah, I know how to do it with a wizard because anybody can do it with a wizard, but we program this. All right. Again, I've said this before. I don't know. There's like 8 tables. We could literally make up 8 forms, right? We could make a project and have a form for each one of these. I don't know if in 3 weeks we can do that or not. I don't know. All right, we'll see. We'll get as much of this done as we can get done. Now, when you look down here, they're starting to show you, okay, they're starting to show you how you put this stuff together. So let's just take a look at the code quickly. So the first thing they do is they create what's called a connection string. All right, now this isn't necessarily going to be our connection string. Okay, and if for nothing else, our thing isn't called books, but I just want to mention some of the stuff that's in here. The data source is basically, where is this located? Okay. The initial catalog is the name of the database. The integrated security, you get some security on this for free by putting that in. All right. Now, do I expect you to understand what every bit of that means? No. Do I expect you to know how to do this? No. We got this wonderful thing that's called the internet. All right. And when you go out to the internet and you go out to, wow, connectionstrings.com, and you start looking in there, notice that I can go and I can do a search. Let me go back one. This is connectionstrings.com, the connection strings reference. So when you go out there, you can do a search and you can look for SQL Server. And lo and behold, there's SQL Server. You don't necessarily want the compact, but right there. So you click there. And here's a bunch of SQL Server connection strings. I had told you before that typically, the way that we're going to use this is we're going to use the SQL ones, but you can use it as an OLEDB and an ODBC. All right. And you might look at these and go, that's fine. I don't understand what the hell any of this is. Well, for instance, if I go here, if I click Microsoft SQL Client Data Provider for SQL Server, doesn't look like much except when I start going down. Then it shows me how you would typically set this up on your system. See that? And what's nice in here is it shows basically all the different databases that it supports. All right. So we will put in our own connection string, but we can start with this if we want to. And when you look at it, it says server equals my server address. Remember that thing that I asked you to save, for instance, with mine? Where is that? Let's see. This thing? Where is it? No. Here. No. Got the wrong one up. Well, I don't know where I have it right now. But the other day when we were going through this, I asked you to save your server name. That's what is there. All right. Then the database. Well, this is going to be sales orders if you indeed named yours sales orders. These two we should not have to put in. This is if you are using right there the window of the SQL Server authentication where you need a username and a password. I told you not to use those because we're doing it the simpler way. All right. So we shouldn't have to do that. All right. So hopefully there's not too much that we're going to have to do with this. Then you come in after you've created the connection string. Notice this says connection string and this says connection. So this is a string right there. There's nothing special about this. This is a string. Here we are attempting to make a connection using that connection string. So we're passing all the stuff in that we need in order to physically make the connection. All right. Then we've got another thing here. Another string. Select star from products, order by product code. And that string becomes our SQL command. So all these names here, connection, select statement, select command, product data adapter, product data set, you can call them whatever the heck you want. We're going to call ours, because when we go through this, we're going to just do the customers table like I showed you. So I call mine, basically I just use like connection string or con, you see a lot of times too. But we'll use, for example, for like our adapter, I just called mine customer data adapter, customer table, etc. All right. So what all these are again explained in here. And again, I don't want to read to you. All right. And that was it. Now, we're going to take a break in a second, but before we do, chapter 18, which we'll cover next week, is pretty much goes over the same stuff that we'll do in that second assignment when we use the wizard. So if you want a little prelude to that, you can step your way through chapter 18 and look through it. It's about 30 or 40 pages, but it explains everything that's happening. All right. So it's 8:58. Let's take a break. Let's come back at 9:15. And I do want to go over that article and hit some of the high points of that article. And then again, I'm expecting that you will be able to make that interface that I showed you. All right. Let's see if I can build that interface during the break. All right, so very quickly during the break, I pieced this together. So I got in, started a new project that I called Sales Orders DB, just one word, big S for sales, big O for orders, big D, big B. DB short for database. Then I went in and I created this. This is the one that I'm going to be working on. We probably won't get into it much until tomorrow. All right. It'll probably be easier for you if you use somewhat what I've got here, but at least my names, because then it'll make it easier when we're putting in the code. But the idea is after we put this in, and again, I know I'm being repetitive here, but when we click this button, what should come up is the first record, our first customer record. And guess what? You already know what that is. Because in other words, if I come in here and I type in here, so if I come in and say, select star from customers, and I know I spelled select wrong, customers. So if I put that in, and then I run the query by clicking execute, I think it's telling me I'm not logged in. All right, invalid name, customers. Well, it doesn't like something. We'll fix it. I'm not worried about it. But if I'll tell you what, I'll come over here to customers and I'll look, select top 1,000 rows. There they are. So ideally, what's going to come up here is going to be Suzanne Viscas, that address, that city, that state, etc. That makes sense to everybody? All right, that's what we're shooting for. So that's the fields that are going to fill in here. All right. And we will have to literally one line of code to move to the first record, one line of code to move to the previous record, one line for the next, one line for the last. I put in an exit button so we can exit at any time. All right. And then after we create it like that, we will go back and we will create it using the wizard. All right. And as I showed you on this handout that I just gave you, these are the names that I'm going to use. So I'm hoping that you will use the same names. All right. Notice I did use the abbreviations here. So instead of button, I used BTN. Some of these names are starting to get long. And even with IntelliSense, it's taken up a lot of room on the screen. So like text box, which is like 7 or 8 characters, it's now 3 characters, which is TXT. Button instead of 6 characters is BTN, etc. All right. Okay, so let's jump back into that handout. All right. So again, these are the pieces, so to speak, that you have in here. You need to make a connection. All right. Not only that, that connection may stay up as long as the program is running. You're connecting to the database. But the other things that are in there, the commands, the adapters, the data readers, basically you use them and you dispose of them. All right, you can bring them back up whenever you need them. And if that doesn't make sense, hopefully it will make sense as we go on in here. This is almost the same as the picture that you saw in your book. We've got a data set that contains tables. Each table has rows or records. Each table also, each row is filled with one or more columns or fields. All right, tables can have constraints on them. Tables can be related to other tables. So it says this figure shows how to work with the connected and disconnected architectures. All right, well, what's the big difference? All right, if you're connected, the idea is, again, depending on the situation that you've got set up for concurrency, you can make it hard for multiple people to work on the same table. If I open up a table and Gabriel here opens up the same table, I might be opening it up just to look at it, but nobody knows that. But while I'm in there, I might decide, oh, I noticed yesterday with one of the apps I was grading in the afternoon class. And in one of the apps, they were asked to build an app that had this was what we were going to do originally. They were going to go around pre-COVID to every instructor and everybody in this institution who works here, take their picture, and then use what's called a recycler view where they'd have their picture, their name, and where they work for. That make sense? Well, we changed it, and we changed it because of COVID. So it just had their, instead of their pictures, like, for example, they went out and found like a caricature or something of people, of like a automotive person, and they put that in there, that kind of thing. Well, I was looking at it yesterday, and Keegan spelled my name Jefffery, which ain't right. All right. I found out when I was a little kid. See, I don't know if any of you've got older siblings, but my older brothers, for lack of better words, they were just jerks. And my brother Mike told me when I was a little kid that I spelled my name Jefffery. And I never questioned it until I was almost 16 and was signing, no, I was 11. I was signing a check for my birthday, and my mom says, "What are you doing?" And I showed it to her, and she goes, "That's not how you spell your name." Not that I'd spelled it a lot previously to that, but she said it's R-E-Y. Well, Keegan had spelled it E-R-Y. So that is the kind of thing that you might go in. You might be going into a database not with the idea that you're going to change anything, just to look at information, but you may say, oh, that was spelled wrong or whatever, and you may decide to change it. So if you are using a connected architecture, that can make it very difficult for other people to come in and work on the same thing you're working on. All right. So we're using the disconnected. So notice what it says. We will open the connection. We will retrieve the data. When we're done with it, we will close the connection. We can still manipulate the data. and then we can open it up again and do an update. Now, is that going to be exactly the way that we're going to do it in here? The answer is really no. And that's, again, because we are all using our own copy of the sales orders database. But this is more reminiscent, what you see right here, to the way it would actually be if you were in a production environment. All right. I mean, again, I know I use them all the time, but if we were all working at Amazon, all right, we'd have to make sure that, but what you don't want to have happen is, I don't want to, say, hey, only 2 left in inventory. So I grabbed those 2, but at the same time, I was on the system. So is Christopher, and he tries grabbing those 2. And it says that we both have those 2 until we try to send them out, and there's only 2. All right. And it may not sound like a big thing to you or me, but there's a lot of places where I can go, for example, if they're books, to buy books from. I don't have to buy them from Amazon. If they just lost a sale, they lost money. And if there's one thing that Bezos seems to know about, it's money. All right. All right, so it says in the connected architecture, the connection is kept open constantly for data access. There are situations where you may want that to happen. Think about why you may want that to happen. Let's assume, let's think about right here, for example. Let's think about Rankin. And let's think about, for example, our payroll system here. If there's only one person who's in charge of payroll, that might be a connected architecture. And they may be able to go in at any time and change anything they want. All right. Pre-COVID, we were typically getting at least a little bit of a salary bump every year. I don't know if we're going to this year or not, but you get the idea. All right. So it says the ADO.NET connected architecture consists of these 3 objects. I've already started to explain these to you. Now, con here is just the name they're giving this SQL connection. CMD is the SQL command, and DR is for the data reader. You can call them whatever you want. Disconnected, as it says, it's the main feature of the .NET framework. It does not always stay connected with the database. The classes are designed so they automatically open and close the connection. So, basically, so people, more than one person, can use the same database. So you notice what we have in here. Well, here we had the connection, the command, and the data reader. Here we've got the connection, the command builder, which is pretty much the command, but an adapter and the data set. And there'll typically be more than that. There'll be a data table in there too. All right. So all of these are explained in here. I don't want to sit and keep reading to you. All right. The key thing right here, look. The connection object, more than anything else, is going to be responsible for opening and closing the connection. All right. And they talk again about SQL and OLEDB. I'm not going to read that or talk about it anymore. I already have. Notice it's required. And it identifies, it's linking up your program with the database that you want to be able to manipulate in the program. I mean, there's nothing more I can say about it than that. All right. So they go through, notice not only they explain it, and then they will show some code examples. So this is how you set it up. And again, when you come through and start doing this, as I mentioned to you previously, this is going to it's going to force you directly or indirectly to put in that using statement that uses that SQL data.data.client. All right, you'll need that in there. So this is the information that goes into the connection string. Do you need every bit of it? No, I already mentioned to you that when you're using straight Windows authentication, when you use Windows authentication, there's no password on the database. There's no username connected with the database. Your Windows credentials are what gets you in. Now, that's totally fine, but again, if we were working in a production environment, we would have it set up with a user ID and a password. Why? Because then you can take certain users, you might only want to give them the ability to run select statements. Read only. They can look at information, but they can't change it. All right. So again, as always, it depends. So again, look at the data source. It says identify the server. Could be a local machine. That's what we have. All right. Could be an IP address. In other words, it could be the IP address, the Internet Protocol address of whatever the database server is that you're connecting to. All right. The initial catalog, as I mentioned before, that's the database name. The integrated security, it says set to SSIP to make a connection with the user's window login. So that's making sure that you, as much as it can, that you are who you say you are. You at least have to be able to come in and provide your Windows credentials. And in this case, they have set it up with, again, with SQL Server configuration and credentials. I'm not going to say it anymore. We've already talked about it. Notice the connection string is different for each type. I already showed you the SQL connection string.com, but they explain in here all of these. That Oracle client, I don't, this is 2020, so, they very well still might be supporting it. One thing about Microsoft, they play best with Microsoft, but that makes sense when you think about it. But that said, if they changed something and they had thousands, if not more, of companies that were using Oracle and were using Microsoft, and they broke connections, that's going to make those companies mad. I think you'd agree with that. And then they might say, oh, geez, maybe we ought to think maybe we shouldn't be using Microsoft. If you don't know this, not only does Oracle own Oracle, not only does Oracle own MySQL, but Oracle also owns Java. So, they could turn around and say, you know what, let's just screw this C# stuff and let's just move over to a Java, to a Java platform. Microsoft doesn't want that. That's money down the drain for them. All right. So here's one way of doing it. So again, notice what you have here. Server equals, that's going to be our server name. Database equals, that will be sales orders. Sometimes you see this when you get it put in there and these fields are all in double quotes. Sometimes they're not. Now, one thing you want to make sure that you're doing is if you've got this stuff in, if you're putting in an ID like this, again, it would involve some work on your part and my part, but we want to encrypt that. We don't want to let anybody who comes in there know the user ID and the password, just in case they're in there under somebody else's account where they could now know their password and their ID. All right, because then they could potentially go in and do damage. But you'll notice since we are using SQL Server, it's an SQL connection. All right. Con is often used, either CON or CONN. You'll see that often. Right. Next, we've got our command object in here. Again, not my intention to read to you, but it allows us to do CRUD. The create, the read, the update, and the delete. And again, create is insert, read is select. And they show some examples. All right. Notice there's a select example. They've got an insert, they've got an update, and they've got a delete. And I remember giving this lecture, one like it, a year, maybe it was 2 years ago, I don't remember. But somebody asked a really good question. They said, I understand this because we wrote queries like this. We've done that kind of stuff, but why don't they just go into SQL Server and do it themselves? All right. And the answer is not everyone who's going to be programming this stuff is going to be well versed in the use of SQL. They don't have to be. They have to know how to write a statement like this or how to have somebody help them write a statement like this, but that's what they do. All right. And think about it. So let's say, okay, fine, they do know all that information. Who are you writing this for? You're writing this for an end user, aren't you? They're probably not going to know, they wouldn't even know, all kidding aside, what SQL stands for, nor would they probably care. So you get an example there of each one of these. Okay? Now look at this. It says a command object also exposes several execute statements. There's an execute scalar. I believe that's spelled wrong. I always thought it was SCALAR. All right. And it says it returns the first column of the first row in the result set. Execute reader, which gives you everything. And this sounds weird. Execute non-query. Okay? And guess what? If I talk to you about CRUD, so if I said these four statements, if I said select, update, insert, the order doesn't matter, and delete. All right? I'm asking you this question. Which one of these four statements, and it is only one, which one of these four statements typically will return one or more records? Which of these four? What? Yeah. Right? Isn't that what we've been doing? And guess what? The non-query is for the other three. Because nothing is returned there. Typically, what gets returned is a message saying one record inserted, one record deleted, one record updated. But it's not returning any information, it just returns a message. So when you execute a non-query, it's typically for these three things. It's for an update, an insert, or a delete. I just found the verbiage funny because to me, those are real queries. And you're executing a non-query. Okay. All right. Then they talk about this data reader. Again, forward only stream. So if the idea is just to be able to show some information to somebody, that's a good way of doing it. Now, that's not what we're going to use. If we use that, we could have we wouldn't have a first button. We wouldn't have a previous button because we couldn't go backwards. Notice how you do this stuff. Again, I'm not running over these examples with you, but you've got a little bit of time today that you can look through this. You're not going to memorize it. That's not the goal of this. The goal is just to be able to look at it and hopefully it makes at least a little bit of sense to you. All right. Notice it provides better performance. And it should. It's read-only and it's only in one direction. That's why it provides better performance. All right. Then we start coming to the big hitters. The data adapter. And as it says here, it's the set of commands and the connection. It's the bridge. Perfect sentence right here. The data adapter forms the bridge between the data source and the data set, the actual database itself and what you're going to return. It's going to allow the communication between your program and the database to take place. That's the simplest way I can explain it. And again, there's one of these specifically for everything we're working with. We're going to be using the SQL data adapter. And you'll notice the SQL, it's just the S in SQL that's uppercase, even though that's three different words. All right. All right. I'm not going to read any of this stuff to you. Probably the key one is what's in here. And again, it is explaining to you how this communication is taking place. Once the adapter has been set up, this is where the magic happens, is right here. And I guess it's because I got the way I've got this thing set up, but then, let's see, that should look like that. And that should look like that. Okay. The fill method is the big one. The fill method populates a data set or a data table object. Well, we're going to have it populate our data table. Then we're going to do what's called bind that information to those text boxes. All right. And then afterwards, when we run through it the second time and we use the wizard, all we have to do is just select about a bunch of stuff. We don't have to write any code, and it'll write the fill method, etc. for us. All right, so there's a fill, there's an update, as it says, to commit changes back to the database. Okay, so you're going to get a chance to do this stuff. So they've set up the adapter right here. It's going to run this command. using that connection, all right, and it's going to basically be filling that table object. Hopefully that at least makes a little bit of sense to you. All right, so they show it pictorially here as far as what's happening. All right. Then they talk about the data set. Notice in the disconnected scenario, which is what we're using, the data retrieved is stuck or put into a local buffer. All a buffer is it's a holding area, for lack of better words. That's called a data set. All right. Notice what a data set is. It's a data table and the relations. It needs all that stuff because, again, what we might be putting in, all right, is a join or something when we're combining information from two different tables. After we create these two projects, we're going to create another one. And the next one that we create won't have a lot of code in it either, but it's going to be called basically an SQL Tester, where we're going to have a text box where we can type in any query we want, and it'll have a button that'll say execute query. We press it. If the query was successful, we'll have a data grid and it'll show us all the results, and we'll have a little text area below that that'll say how many records did it give us. And once we do that, I'm going to let you play with that for a while because that's how you learn, is to sit there and start writing your own queries against the database. So again, the data set, and this is all good stuff. Notice it's slower, but sometimes it's necessary depending on what it is you're doing. All right. Next is the command builder object. Notice automatically generates insert, update, and delete queries. Okay. So here's an example right here. And I'm not saying that what they show here is exactly the way we're going to be doing it. Good, bad, or indifferent, there's plenty of different ways of doing the same thing. All right? All right. And there you can see this differences between a data reader and a data set. You can look at that on your own if you're interested. Now, notice this. Data view object. I mentioned a view to you yesterday. And I said a view is a saved query, which is basically what it is. All right. So it says a data view provides a dynamic view of data. That's pretty important. The word dynamic means that you can change stuff. All right. And now they come in and they actually start writing. So here's the form that they have. And then they give you the code. Okay. Then it says design a form for accepting details for employees. Use the connected architecture. So they show you another example. This is more similar to what we're going to start to build right here. What we'll want to be able to do, maybe we won't even do all this, but we'll want to be able, for example, to put in either an employee ID or a name or whatever, not a salary probably, but one of these two, have all the things that meet that criteria here. Then be able to make changes, etc. All right. And they give you again the code for doing this. All right. Then there's another one. Looks very similar to the one they just went over. Here's more similar to what we're going to be building. All right. It's not exactly the same, but again, you get the idea. And that's pretty much it. So what I'm going to ask, it's 9:42, at about 9:50 to 9:55. Again, I'm going into the office for this meeting. I think it'll be no more than an hour. It may be as small as little as a half an hour. I don't know. Mr. Gudmisted is teaching differently than I am. Typically, he has his students come in 2 days a week. Mr. Smith typically has his students come in 2 days a week, and they work from home the rest of the time. So why don't you do that, Jeff? When I did that a year ago, I went from 6 students to 2. because the other 4 couldn't handle it. I don't want to do that again. All right. We already have smaller numbers in here than they have next door, and I didn't want to lose anybody else. That's why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. All right. I just don't think this stuff works all that great when you try to broadcast it. All right. Okay, so you've got this to work on. You've got this that you can start building. All right. And if you still get bored, again, you can either work on your gen eds or come in and start reading chapter 18. Hopefully you've got enough to do. The plan tomorrow is to go and actually build this. When I say build it, I mean put the code in there to make the buttons work. We can already, I mean, this button you could already do, right? You could already do the exit one. That's no biggie. All right. Again, 1 line of code, 1 line of code, 1 line of code, 1 line of code. All right. But we are going to have to set up what we want to set up. In other words, our connections, all the other stuff. Okay. So that's what we will end up doing tomorrow.